Author's Purpose and Voice, Level E, Lesson 38. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to recognize the author's purpose and message, understand how text structure contributes to the author's purpose, understand the author's voice and how it is created through the use of language, identify the use of anecdotes and hyperbole. What you should know before doing this lesson. An anecdote is a short, amusing, or interesting story about an incident or a person. A hyperbole is an exaggerated statement not meant to be taken literally. For example, the lake was so still and clear you could see through it down to the center of the earth. You know that you can't really see to the center of the earth, but the point is the lake was very clear. Some awesome words to look at before we read. Slathered. Say the word. Slathered. Slathered is a verb. It means to spread or smear a substance thickly. A synonym for slathered is spread. Colliding. Say the word. Colliding. Colliding is a verb. It means to strike against with a forceful impact. A synonym for colliding is crash. Relentless. Say the word. Relentless. Relentless is an adjective. It means constant, determined to do something, refusing to stop. A synonym for relentless is nonstop. One reason an author writes is to tell a true story about an experience. Think about the experience the author is telling about in the next story. Follow along and listen as I read the story. On the river. I will never forget the river tubing trip I took with my cousin Roberto, even if I lived to be 200 years old. It had to be one of the scariest moments of my life. In June, Roberto invited me to go on a river tubing trip. I knew all about riding a river. The summer before, my family had gone whitewater rafting. It had been a thrilling ride. I was tossed out of the raft once, but I easily swam back and climbed up into the raft. I figured if I could handle whitewater rafting, riding in a tube down a river would be a piece of cake. Roberto and I headed to the launch point. First, we slathered on sunscreen as we read the list of rules for tubing. Sure, I could swim, and I wouldn't jump off rocks into the river. Then Roberto and I put on our helmets and life jackets and picked up our inner tubes. There were no paddles, though. We'd steer with our hands. Next, we headed down to the river. Roberto sat in his tube and pushed off from the bank. I quickly followed. Well, riding in a raft felt safer than moving in a tube, in my opinion. A raft bounced off the rocks. Now it was my feet colliding with the rocks. My tube kept spinning in the churning water. I was paddling with my hands, but they did not control the tube as the paddles had controlled the raft. Paddling and spinning, I continued down the river. The current was flowing very fast. I was moving faster than the speed of light. I spun in my tube, sometimes heading down the river feet first, and sometimes moving backwards. I paddled desperately with my hands to keep facing forward. I needed to see where I was going. I saw where I was going now. My tube was heading toward the riverbank, where a tree spread its low branches like a spider web over the water. Each minute I got closer. If I kept gliding in that direction, I'd end up tangled with that tree. With some seriously vigorous paddling, I managed to steer away. Soon after, I was back in the middle of the river. Roberto was floating way ahead, and I wanted to catch up. "Wait up, Roberto!" I called. But of course he couldn't put on the brakes in the middle of a river. Its relentless flow kept pulling him on. It kept pulling me on, too. This was a ride with no time outs. Sometimes the river was flat and calm, and then suddenly there would be rocks and swirling wild water. The river rolled on and on. Each time I saw rocks ahead, my stomach dropped. I glanced up ahead and spotted a set of choppy rapids. Without a guide, I was certain of the best approach. I was on my own. Would I get through safely? I took a deep breath as I advanced. Then my tube spun around backward, and I felt a jolt. I had run up against a rock. Hiss! A sharp edge of the rock had torn a hole in my tube, and it quickly deflated, taking on the appearance of a wounded seal. I tumbled into the water, the current tugging at me. I was barely able to hang on to the rock. My fingertips started slipping down the rock. Now what? I heard someone calling, "Are you okay?" It was an assistant from the River Tubing Company. She was standing on the bank, slightly upstream from where I clung to the rock, and she had a tube. She shouted, "I'm going to throw this tube in the water. Grab it when it floats down to you. Then you can finish riding the river." I was in no mood to continue. I wanted a proper rescue. I wanted a helicopter with a basket dangling from a rope to save me from the river. That was the way people were rescued from floods. I had seen it on TV. But this was not a flood. It had been my choice to ride the river. I snagged the new tube as it came at me and hauled myself up onto it. Roberto was already at the end of the run. I could see him peering up the river, looking for me. The river carried me gently now. It took ages to reach the landing point. I climbed out of the tube. "Great ride, right?" asked Roberto. I was so exhausted. I could not take another step. I could only shake my head. I'd stick to whitewater rafting. So thinking about the experience the author's telling about, he's telling about a scary experience while river tubing. The message the author wants to send is that sometimes experiences are different than you expect. The author's voice is the way the author's attitude and personality show in the writing. Based on the way the author uses language in this paragraph, how would you describe his voice here? Does he sound confident, bored, or frightened? The author uses words and phrases, such as a piece of cake, that show he is confident at this point in the text. Sometimes authors use anecdotes in their writing. An anecdote is a short account of an event used to support a point. Look at the blue highlighted sentence. We know the author is going to tell about a river tubing trip. He includes an anecdote about a whitewater rafting trip. Look at the last sentence in paragraph 2. The author is comparing rafting to what he expects of river tubing. He thinks river tubing will be much easier. A hyperbole is exaggeration an author uses for emphasis. Look at the first sentence of the passage. Look at the hyperbole highlighted in green. What does the author want to emphasize? Well, no one can live to be 200 years old. The author wants to show that what happened was so important he would never forget it. Practice 1. Connect text structure to author's purpose. Authors use different text structures based on what they want to tell readers. Some examples of text structure include compare-contrast, cause-effect, chronological, and problem-solution. Identifying text structure can help you understand information the author wants you to know. What do Roberto and the narrator do when they get to the launch point? They're putting on sunscreen as they read the rules. You can look for clue words that signal text structure. The words first, then, and next help you understand the order of events in this part of the text. The author uses chronological text structure here and in the passage as a whole. In paragraph 5, the author is comparing whitewater rafting to river tubing. What kind of text structure does the author use here? That would be compare-contrast. The author wants you to understand that there are similarities and differences between whitewater rafting and river tubing. Looking at paragraph 7, which reads, I saw where I was going now. My tube was heading toward the riverbank where a tree spread its low branches like a spider web over the water. Each minute I got closer. If I kept gliding in that direction, I'd end up tangled with that tree. With some seriously vigorous paddling, I managed to steer away. Soon after, I was back in the middle of the river. What problem does the narrator have here? He's headed for a tree on the riverbank. How does he solve the problem? He paddles hard and gets away from the bank. So what kind of text structure is this? Problem solution. Practice 2. Recognize author's voice. You can evaluate the words and phrases an author uses to determine the author's voice. This author's voice is the way the author's attitude and personality show in the writing. Look at the words highlighted in paragraph 9. Pulling me on, ride with no timeouts, swirling, wild water, my stomach dropped. And in paragraph 10, without a guide, uncertain, on my own. Why do you think the author chose these words? These words create a dramatic voice in the text. When the author asks the question, would I get through safely? It increases the drama and suspense because you don't know if he will be able to stay out of trouble. Continue looking at paragraph 10. Do you see any other words or phrases that help you understand the author's dramatic voice? Tumbled into the water. Current tugging. Barely able to hang on. Fingertips slipping. Practice 3. Identify the use of anecdote and hyperbole. An anecdote is a short account of an event used to support a point. A hyperbole is exaggeration an author uses for emphasis. Look at the blue highlighted text. This is an anecdote. The author uses this anecdote to show how desperate he is to get out of the river and also to show his sense of humor. Read the green highlighted text. This is a hyperbole. Does it really take ages for the narrator to reach the landing point? The author wants to show that he couldn't wait to get to shore. He was so eager to get to shore that it seemed to take a long time. Let's review what we learned in this lesson. Text structure contributes to author's purpose. The author's voice is the way the author's attitude and personality show in writing. An author uses an anecdote or short account of events to make a point in a story. An author uses hyperbole or exaggeration to emphasize an idea. We read the awesome words slathered. Slathered means to spread or smear thickly. Colliding. Colliding means to strike with force. Relentless. Relentless means refusing to stop.